Clovice is a professional cellist and composer who composed his first symphony at the age of 17 and was a professor of computer music at UC Santa Barbara from 1978 to 1986. He has also been a serial entrepreneur and software designer for the past 30 years. In addition to music and technology, he has had a lifelong passion for aviation and has been a private pilot since 1987. Clovice intends to become a UU minister with an emphasis in breaking down racial, class, and ethnic barriers, and in preaching the gospel of the madness of human self-extinction. He shares with us today his deeply personal journey in the arc of justice, up close and personal. Let us now welcome Clovice Lewis to our pulpit.
I'm tired, triggered, stressed, outraged, terribly sad. How do I compress 400 years of injustice into the few minutes of a sermon? How do I do that without lecturing or accusing or making people feel bad about themselves? I struggled all week, this week, with what to say about our UU principles and how they address this difficult time of racial upheaval we're in. And then it occurred to me that we already know what these principles say. We already know what we need to do to make a more perfect union. What you probably don't know is what it's like to be a Black man in this society. So this morning, I'm going to tell you what it's like. Did you know that I had my first life-threatening experience with a Southern sheriff when I was 12 years old in 1968? My father sat down with me and gave me the talk just a few minutes after I got home. How can you know that out of the countless times I've been stopped by police in my life, at least 7 times were for completely non-legal reasons? Did you know I was stopped by 2 separate pairs of police in cruisers within 10 minutes on one night in Santa Barbara, and that both sets of officers tried to physically provoke me? I survived that experience because I was a college student, and I guess I wasn't threatening enough, or maybe breaking my head might have caused too much trouble. Did you know that in March of 2012, I almost didn't make it back from a trip from Texas because I was detained by a Texas trooper for almost an hour. He had me leave my car and he interrogated me in his cruiser because I'm convinced he was trying to decide whether he was going to kill me that day. I survived that time because I disarmed him with patience and kindness and thoughtful listening. And well, I think I survived because he'd never met anybody like me. Here's a news flash. The police are not friendly to Black people. We avoid them like the plague. They are the modern overseers who will kill us or send us to a penitentiary plantation. So you either survive an encounter and go home, or you're unlucky enough to have a cop who will try to provoke you through humiliation or threat into an arrest. So they'll tell you to say or do something, but if you refuse or you're simply confused, they'll claim you're resisting orders. If you argue, then you're resisting arrest. And if they get you in handcuffs, depending on where you live or the mood of the cop, there is a possibility you'll never make it to the police station. Do you know how many black people have been killed by gunshots to the head while handcuffed and in police custody? No, the police are not our friends, and they sure as hell don't protect and serve us. If they do, say we have a pleasant experience, we're always surprised. If you don't believe me, go find some other random black man and ask him to verify what I'm saying. If he's honest, he'll tell you of his experiences that most likely surpass my own. So let's say you play the game. You play by the rules. You go to college and you get a degree. You learn that to succeed, you always wear a coat and tie. Hell, you sleep in your tie, so you're really, really comfortable in it. You know you have to be at least 5 times better at anything you do than your white counterparts. In my case, I started a multimedia company in the Bay Area when I was 26 years old in 1984. 8 years later, I had secured a $10 million contract for my company with a division of a large corporation. I employed 14 people working in shifts at one of their facilities, and we were rocking. We developed 2 specialized, innovative software products as partners with the division in support of a proposal for the US government. And then when the division won the contract with our help, they decided to screw us. They literally stole the software, one of the software products that we developed, selling it to the government for years and not paying us for it. For the other software, they lied to the government that we couldn't deliver it because they discovered that as a minority-owned firm, we didn't have the expertise to actually do the work. So the government gave the division a waiver without investigating their claims, and the division sold inferior programs from other companies to the government instead. After I discovered this, I confronted the senior management of the division for an explanation. Shortly after that, I was called into meeting with them, all middle-aged white men. When I asked them why they were deliberately cheating my company out of millions of dollars, they said something to me that I will never forget, something that's been etched into my DNA. The vice president of the division told me they all agreed that $10 million is too much money for somebody like you. He then told me that I could sue them, but I'd never win, and their army of lawyers would make my life a living hell. And he was right. A few days later, we were gone. They looted us. They did that through racial discrimination, fraud, theft, plain old avarice. Of course, my company couldn't survive that blow. And there are former employees even today, 30 years later, who've never gotten over that experience. In business, I learned not to demonstrate software I created because I was too much of a distraction in presentations. I learned to send my white engineers to do that in my place. I also learned not to show up to some clients because they preferred to interact with my white employees. If I was assertive, just as assertive as a white man would be, I would be perceived as being threatening. If I called people out for being unfair, I had a chip on my shoulder. And don't get me started on how much fun it is to look for an apartment. It got to be almost comical after I purchased one of those brick-sized cell phones. I'd call from the parking lot to arrange for an apartment. And 2 minutes later, I'd walk into the office and somehow they didn't have any more apartments. No, we don't take cats. No, you can't pay cash for your rent 3 months in advance. I learned that the best thing to do was to have my white wife at the time and her mother do the renting. I was always away on a business trip. Later, white people would be incensed with me that I had not stated that I'm Black in newspaper want ads when they came to my door looking for a room to rent in my house. One time, I did manage to rent a place, had a signed contract, but the owner called me later and she said that she'd rented it to a white couple because they would be neater. And let's see. Shopping is always a thrill. That goes under the general category of doing anything while Black. Just fill in the blank. We see a lot of that these days. It's even videotaped. I'm always scrutinized wherever I go, or there is often an assumption that I shouldn't be where I am. And those questions aren't always orally expressed, but they're there, and they started very, very early in my life. You can't swim here because you're a Negro. You can't play here because you're Black. Would you please get something to clean this up? What are you doing in this neighborhood? Who's your friend? Where do you live? What's your address? Are you maintenance? I thought we were going to meet the CEO of your company. I know you just saw someone doing that, but you can't write a check here. Are you in the orchestra? So, you're actually going to get in that airplane and fly it. I know you haven't heard these things from me in the past. Some of you might have, but it's not something I talk about all the time. You probably might not have heard most of these things before from your other Black friends because we are socialized to keep these things from you. We are born to please you, appease you, to keep you psychologically comfortable and keep your mind off of our differences so you don't see those differences and abuse us or pity us or victimize us for them. Now, I know this is a shocking thing to say, but it's based on hard science of epigenetics. In Rizme Manikim's groundbreaking book called My Grandfather's Hands, he claims that trauma is compounding. And that trauma caused by racial or environmental factors can be transmitted through DNA. Manikim's description of the role of DNA in transmitting trauma is astonishing. He wrote, "Trauma can be inherited genetically. Recent work in genetics has revealed that trauma can change the expression of the DNA in our cells, and these changes can be passed from parent to child." And it gets weirder. We now have evidence that memories connected to painful events also get passed down from parent to child, and to that child's child. What's more, these experiences appear to be held, passed on, and inherited in the body, not just in the thinking brain. White people are dangerous to Black people, especially to Black men. Sometimes we don't know what you're going to do. Will you stick a dog on me? When I knock on your door for directions, will you shoot me in the face? If I drive in your gated community, will I be roadblocked in? If I'm stopped by a white cop, will I survive the encounter? If I offend you in some way, or you perceive me as a threat, will you use your ace in the hole white privilege to call down the wrath of white supremacist law enforcement on me? And if you haven't done that yet, you can take lessons from Amy Cooper. Actually, you don't even have to do that in most states. If you're armed, all you have to do is say you were afraid for your life, and voila, you can kill a nigger in self-defense. You have to stand your ground after all. This insane, broken system of white supremacy coded into law and assured by juries is what allows 99% of all police involved in the killings of Black people to not face any charges. It allows the killers, the lawyers of the killers of Jogger, Ahmed Arbery, after chasing him and striking him with their trucks, those lawyers claim now that the father and son killed him in self-defense because Ahmed fought them and tried to wrestle the shotgun from the son, Travis McMichael. So here's what I'm getting at. Epigenetically and sociologically, I, as a Black man, have been programmed to survive by not causing you, a white person, any discomfort associated with the power of your privilege. And this is the unspoken, unconscious, and potentially deadly dance that we do. The situation that we're in is it's my fault for not telling you about the constant pain and suffering I experience on top of all the other crap we all have to deal with in life. So the terrible thing is that when I don't tell you these things, I become complicit in my own oppression. On the other hand, who wants to hear about terrible things their ancestors did? White people are not stupid. You know about the struggles Black people have, and you don't want to hear about it all the time. So you pretend that the civil rights laws are working just fine. And that because we live in a post-civil rights age, that some of the problems of injustice, racial inequalities, and economic disparities have at least a proper structure for redress that Black people are simply not availing themselves of. You marched with Martin Luther King, or you know someone who did. You're not prejudiced. You did your part. Guess what? Whatever it is that you did or do now to be an ally of Black people, whatever contribution you made, whatever hand you used to lift up your brother, it's obviously not enough. The terrible thing is that makes you feel bad, and that makes you complicit in my oppression. So here we are again. The 1920s saw race riots in this country. The 1960s saw race riots in this country. The 1990s saw race riots in this country. And now in 2020, right on schedule, we see race riots in this country. Why? Because we have never addressed our dark secret with anything other than legislation and some goodwill. We have not changed hearts and minds. People of color are locked into a death spiral with white America because, let's be honest, white America is afraid of losing its identity and its historical privilege. There's solid research to suggest that this fear runs extremely deep, that it runs deep enough to tear our nation apart. The research shows that much of the extreme hardening of political ideology is a function of racism. For example, political scientists Stephen Miller and Nicholas Davis of Texas A&M released a study in 2016 titled "White Out-Group Intolerance and Declining Support for American Democracy." Their study found a correlation between white Americans' intolerance and support for authoritarian rule. In other words, when intolerant white people fear democracy may benefit marginalized people, they abandon their commitment to democracy. Study after study confirms this in what scientists now call the Trump effect of rising authoritarianism. So here we are. What do we do? How can we fix this? First, I want to say that our national struggle with race has been witnessed by the entire world recently. Compassion for African Americans is expressed by people of nearly every nation. In our own country, I have to say 3 good things that have come out of the trauma of watching George Floyd's execution. The first good thing is the outrage against his murder and the fierce protests because of that. And it revealed an awful lot of white folks, young and old, there in the streets with us. In cities all across this nation that don't have a lot of white people and black people in them, especially those young white kids are marching with the same fire as their black brothers and sisters. I hope they get their sorry, I marched with King parents off their couches and into the fight. The second good thing is that black people are finally revealing how much we're hurting. We are not willing to accommodate white America's fragility anymore. We will insist that you take responsibility for your actions and beliefs that perpetuate this unjust system of white supremacy. So the more uncomfortable you are, the more we will consider this is a good sign of progress. And the last thing is that Donald Trump doesn't even pretend to hide his racism anymore. He doesn't even pretend to be a president. And he's revealed his profound amorality and breathtaking narcissism in all its startling splendor. Americans have a choice, a stark choice to make. Authoritarianism that preserves white supremacy, or a messy democracy that might finally live up to its stated principles. As people of all races and ethnicities, we are tired, triggered, stressed, outraged, and terribly sad. We can't get through this without some really, really radical changes. People of color need to be able to tell white people, ouch, when we hurt. And you white people have got to believe us. We all must understand on a DNA level that we all suffer when one suffers. We are all diminished when one is diminished. And injustice for all truly, truly is an injustice for all. Damn it. This is only a dry run for the crushing reality of climate disruption to come. If we can't figure out how to let go of the illusion of race and the illusion that one group of human beings are superior to others, we're doomed to extinction, and we will deserve it. So here's what I say we're going to have to do. Here's how we're going to do this thing from now on. We are going to love the hell out of each other. Namaste.